She was 7 months pregnant and standing in the snow outside a fundraising gala when her husband took the invitation from her hand, tore it in half, and told her she was embarrassing him. Not quietly. Not as an aside. In front of 6 of his colleagues, 2 of their wives, and a parking attendant who had the decency to look away. The invitation had her name on it. Her name because the gala was for the hospital where she worked. Because the hospital had asked her specifically to attend. Because she was, in fact, the reason the evening existed at all, though none of the people standing on that sidewalk knew that yet. Her husband, Callum Whitmore, laughed after he did it. A short, dismissive sound, the kind men make when they want an audience to confirm that they are not the problem. He said she had been hovering all evening, that she made everything about herself, that she could get a cab home because, frankly, the fresh air would do her good. Then he turned back to his colleagues and resumed the conversation she had apparently interrupted by existing. Petra stood on the sidewalk in her wool coat, the torn pieces of the invitation in her left hand, her right hand pressed flat against her stomach where the baby had just kicked twice in quick succession, as if registering a complaint. She did not say anything. She counted 4 seconds of silence. Then she let the pieces of the invitation fall into the snow, reached into her coat pocket, and took out her phone. She made one call. 12 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up to the curb. The rear door opened. A woman named Claudette, who had worked for Petra's family for 19 years, and who had very specific feelings about Callum Whitmore, stepped out with a coat that cost more than his monthly salary and placed it around Petra's shoulders without comment. Petra got in. The door closed. The SUV pulled away from the gala, from the torn invitation, from the 6 colleagues and 2 wives, from the man who was still laughing on the sidewalk. Callum did not notice the car. He did not notice Petra had gone until 40 minutes later, when he wanted her to get him another drink. Part 1. The woman behind the name. Her name was Petra Fontaine, and she had been hiding for 3 years. Not hiding in the dramatic sense. Not hiding from anyone specific. Hiding the way a person hides, when they have spent their entire adult life being approached, for the wrong reasons, when every introduction carries the weight of a calculation, when even the people who seem to love you slightly more after they find out what your family is worth. She had grown up in the Fontaine household in Westmount, Montreal, which was not the sort of house that appeared in lifestyle magazines, because the Fontaines had never needed that kind of attention. Edouard Fontaine had built his fortune quietly, over 40 years in commercial licensing and commercial deals across 6 provinces. He was not flashy, he was not political, he was the kind of man whose name appeared in financial documents and almost nowhere else, which was precisely how he preferred it. Petra had understood from early childhood that her last name functioned less like an identity and more like a magnet. She watched it pull people toward her father's table, watched their smiles shift when certain numbers were mentioned, watched friendships calcify around expectation. By the time she was 17, she had developed a system for sorting people that she never spoke aloud. Shiver. She simply watched. How they treated the person pouring coffee, how they handled being told no, whether they remembered things she'd told them about herself when nothing was expected in return. She went to nursing school under her mother's maiden name, Sorel, not illegally, not secretly. She simply stopped mentioning the Fontaine side. She moved from Montreal to Ottawa, rented an apartment, took shifts in the maternity ward, and built a life that was entirely her own in the most literal sense she could manage. She was not lonely. She had colleagues she trusted, and a friend from nursing school named Heidi, who had known her since before she could maintain the composure that wealth sometimes teaches, and so had seen her cry in a hospital stairwell over a patient she couldn't save, and had never once treated her differently afterward. Heidi knew about the Fontaines. Heidi was the only person in Petra's Ottawa life who did. She met Callum at a hospital fundraiser, which in retrospect contained all the information she needed. He was a project manager at a downtown architecture firm, presentable, articulate, the kind of man who fills a room without quite owning it. He asked what she did. She told him. He asked nothing about her family. At the time, she marked this as a positive sign. They dated for 14 months. She watched him carefully. He was charming and occasionally thoughtful and consistently present, which she had learned not to take for granted. He did not Google her obsessively. He showed up when he said he would. He was patient with the long shifts and the rearranged plans and the nights when she came home too tired to do anything except sit on the couch and stare at the wall. She decided to trust him. She married him at a small ceremony in the Gatineau Hills. Her father attended. He shook Callum's hand, made a toast that was warm and brief, and said nothing about money because Petra had asked him not to, and because Edouard Fontaine was a man who respected his daughter's choices, even when he was quietly reserving judgment. The first year was fine. The second year, things shifted. Not dramatically. Not in a way that was easy to name. The shift was in the texture of daily life, in the accumulation of small moments that individually seemed like nothing and collectively became a pattern. Petra managed their household. This was not an arrangement she had agreed to explicitly. It simply became true, gradually, the way certain things become true in marriages, where one person is more organized, and the other person benefiting from organization without acknowledging it. The mortgage payments, and the utility accounts, and the insurance, and the grocery orders, and the dinner reservations, and the social calendar that kept Callum connected to the professional network he depended on. She scheduled the maintenance appointments for the condo. She tracked the tax documents. She reminded him of his own parents' birthdays. She also worked 12-hour shifts in a maternity ward where she was responsible for the health of infants and their mothers, and the coordination of a care team that sometimes included 12 people at once. Callum came home and ate dinner, and watched television, and went to bed in a clean space that ran smoothly, and never once asked what it had taken to make it run. He also had a mother. Part 2. The mother-in-law, Lillian. Elspeth Whitmore was 71 years old and had lived her entire life in Barrie, Ontario. She was not a complicated woman. She was a woman who had strong opinions about how things should be done and had organized her relationships around the assumption that her opinions constituted facts. She visited Ottawa 4 times a year. Petra cleaned and cooked and prepared for each visit with the thoroughness of someone who understood that nothing she did would be sufficient and that pointing this out would only make things worse. Elspeth's technique was specific. She did not criticize directly. She observed. She offered helpful clarifications that implied deficiency without stating it. She made a point of noting every task Callum completed, no matter how minor, in a tone of appreciative surprise, as though a grown man making toast was a feat worth marking. Callum set the table, she would say, in the same voice she might use to announce a civic achievement. Petra had set the table for 6 years before Callum said it once, while his mother was visiting, because Petra had been on a 12-hour shift and had not yet had the opportunity. She did not say this. She offered Elspeth more tea. The exclusion followed a pattern Petra recognized from families where one person's presence was considered optional. Cottage weekends planned without her input. Family dinners she learned about from Callum the morning of. A group text she was added to 3 months after it was created, and only because Callum's sister Fiona had mentioned her by name, and someone had to explain she wasn't already in it. When Petra raised these things with Callum, he responded the way he always responded, with mild surprise that quickly became mild irritation, as though she was describing a problem in a language he'd never learned. "It's just how they are," he would say. "You're too sensitive about it." He said this wearing a shirt Petra had ironed, at a table Petra had set, eating food Petra had made after a morning shift, where she had spent 40 minutes helping a young mother through a complication that had frightened everyone in the room except Petra, who had kept her voice steady and her hands steadier. He said it, and then he looked back at his phone. Part 3. The discovery. Petra found out about the other woman on a Tuesday. She was not looking owed. She was trying to figure out why their joint credit card had a $340 charge from a hotel in Gatineau that she had no memory of, on a Saturday when Callum had told her he was golfing with a client. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then she opened her laptop and began. She approached it the way she approached complex care situations at work. Methodically, without letting the emotional reality crowd out the functional response. She documented what she found, and she cross-referenced. She kept a folder in a secure cloud account, under a password. Callum did not know. Over the following 3 weeks, the picture became clear. The woman was named Brooke, an interior designer Callum had met through a firm he'd collaborated with on a commercial project. The relationship had been ongoing for approximately 8 months. The hotel in Gatineau was the third hotel, restaurant charges, an overnight in Kingston, a ticket to an architecture lecture. Callum had told Petra he was attending for professional development. Petra documented everything. She did not confront him. She was 7 months pregnant. The timing required thought. Part 4. The Gala. The gala was for St. Catherine's Women's Hospital, where Petra worked. The hospital's foundation had organized it as an annual fundraiser. Petra had been asked to attend in a capacity that the invitation described as in recognition of nursing excellence, which was the foundation's polite way of noting that she had quietly arranged for a significant anonymous donation to arrive 6 months earlier, channeled through a family trust she had never mentioned to Callum. The trust was one of 4. The Fontaine family's financial structure was not simple. Her father had spent decades building something that was specifically designed not to be visible. Petra had grown up understanding this structure the way she understood anatomy, as a system with logic and purpose, not as an abstraction. The donation had come from the Sorel Family Trust. Nobody at the hospital connected the name Sorel to the nurse named Petra Sorel Fontaine, who worked Tuesday and Thursday shifts in maternity. Petra had made sure of that. She had wanted to attend the gala as herself. As Petra, the nurse, not as a Fontaine, not as a donor, not as anything requiring explanation. She had wanted to sit in a room of her colleagues and eat rubber chicken and watch the children's choir perform and go home and feel that she had done something quietly good in the world. Callum had insisted on coming. She had not wanted to argue about it. She had let him come. Then, on the sidewalk in the snow, in front of 6 people she did not especially care about, he had taken the invitation from her hand and torn it. Because she was hovering. Because she was making things about herself. She sat in the back of the SUV as Claudette drove through the winter dark, and she felt something shift in her chest. Not breaking. Settling. The way a structure settles when a decision has finally been made and the uncertainty that was holding everything in tension is simply gone. She called her father. Edouard Fontaine answered on the second ring. "It's done," she said. A pause. He knew what she meant. They had spoken about the possibility. "Are you safe?" "Yes, the baby?" "Fine, kicking." Another pause. She could hear him breathing. "Tell me what happened," she told him. And she finished. The silence on the line was the specific silence of a man choosing not to deploy resources that could complicate several industries. "I'll call Maitre Tremblay tonight," he said. "Don't go back to the condo." "I'm not. Claudette has the address? She knows where we're going." He paused again. "Petra." "I know, Papa." The quietest ones always do the most damage when they finally decide to leave. She closed her eyes and listened to the snow against the window. Part 5. The Activation. The apartment on Elgin Street had been Petra's for 2 years. She had purchased it through the Sorel Trust under a corporate name, furnished it carefully, stocked it twice a year as a matter of habit. She had never explained its existence to Callum, because she had never felt she owed him an explanation for something that was entirely hers. She had thought of it as a contingency. She had hoped never to need it. The lights were on when she arrived. Billy, a colleague of her father's, had arranged for the heat to be turned up and the refrigerator to be stocked. Petra walked through the door, sat in the armchair by the window, and looked out at the Ottawa River in the dark. She allowed herself 10 minutes of stillness. Then she took out a notebook and began to write. Not feelings, plans. By morning, Maitre Tremblay's team had filed papers that Callum would receive the following afternoon. The filing included a detailed financial record of every contribution Petra had made to their shared household over 3 years of marriage. The mortgage payments, because the mortgage was in her name and had always been paid from her account. The utilities, the insurance premiums. 3 specific instances where she had transferred funds to cover a gap in Callum's commission cycle without telling him. Because telling him would have required explaining how she had the funds to spare, and explaining that would have opened the door she'd kept carefully closed. She had documentation for all of it. The filing also noted, as a matter of record, that the property itself, the Centertown condo they had lived in together, was owned by the Sorel Family Trust. Callum had never asked whose trust that was. Part 6. The Unraveling. Week 1. The mortgage notification arrived by automated email. Callum called the bank. The account the mortgage was linked to had been frozen pending legal review. The bank representative was polite and entirely unhelpful. Callum spent 2 hours on the phone and accomplished nothing. Week 2. The utilities. Same pattern. Every account was in Petra's name, had always been in Petra's name, and was now in the hands of her legal team. Callum received a notice about the hydro. He put it on the kitchen counter, next to the takeout containers. Week 3. He called his mother. Elspeth arrived on a Wednesday with a rolling suitcase, and the attitude of someone coming to manage a crisis she partially regarded as exciting. She found the condo in a state that confused her. The system that had kept it running was simply absent. There were no groceries, because Petra had done the grocery ordering, and Callum did not know which service she used. There were no clean towels, because Petra had handled where she laundry logistics, and Callum did not know where she kept the detergent. The plant in the kitchen was dying. Several bills were overdue. The condo's property management company had emailed 3 times about a maintenance assessment fee that nobody had responded to. Elspeth went looking for the filing system. She found the binder. Petra kept a household management binder. It had tabs. It had color-coded sections for recurring expenses, maintenance schedules, emergency contacts, insurance policies, the name and direct number of every service provider they used. It was the kind of document that revealed, at a glance, the full scope of the invisible work being done inside a household that appeared to simply function on its own. Elspeth sat at the kitchen table with the binder open in front of her and was quiet for a long time. She called Fiona. She ran everything, Elspeth said. What do you mean? I mean, she ran everything. The mortgage is her account. The insurance is her name. There's a binder, Fiona. There are tabs. A pause. I thought she was just organized, Fiona said. She was the only adult in this house, Elspeth said. I helped him drive her out. It was the most honest sentence Elspeth Whitmore had ever said about her daughter-in-law. It arrived approximately 3 years too late and did not change anything. Part 7. Brooke's exit. Brooke lasted 5 weeks after Petra left. She had been drawn to Callum in a specific way that Petra might have recognized. She had looked at his life and seen a man who had things together. The clean home, the professional ease, the condo in a desirable neighborhood, the dinner parties that ran smoothly. The way he carried himself like someone who was managing things competently. She had been looking at Petra's engineering. Without it, Callum was a man who ate cereal at 10 at night, who couldn't find his own insurance documents, whose professional momentum was visibly stalling, whose energy had the quality of someone in free fall, trying to convince themselves it was a controlled descent. Brooke was practical. The math was not difficult, and he left. On a Saturday with her things in 2 bags, and she did not explain herself, because the explanation would have been more honest than she wanted to be. Callum sat alone in the condo, and felt something he could not quite name. Not grief, closer to vertigo. The sensation of a man discovering that the floor under him had not been floor at all, but something temporary, something arranged by someone else, and now it was gone. And there was no floor, and he had not known, for 3 years, that he needed to worry about the floor. Part 8. The Symposium. The Canadian Women in Health Leadership Symposium was held every spring at the Shaw Centre in Ottawa. It was a well-regarded event. Approximately 400 attendees, institutional donors, hospital administrators, research chairs, government health officials. The keynote donation for that year's symposium had been arranged 6 months earlier by the Fontaine Family Foundation, which had made a contribution of a scale that placed their representative at the head table, with a speaking slot following the opening remarks. Callum's architecture firm had been hired to design the symposium space. This was a contract they had won the previous autumn, and which Callum had presented to his partners as a significant professional achievement. He attended in a professional capacity. He sat at a table near the back with his project lead and a junior associate. He was not expecting anything unusual. Petra walked in at 7:15. She was not the person they remembered, because she had stopped performing the person they remembered. The scrubs were gone. The practical ponytail was gone. Really, the expression of patient accommodation that she had worn in Callum's household like a uniform was gone. She wore a charcoal blazer over a deep green dress, Her hair was down. She walked with the particular unhurriedness of someone who has calculated exactly what the room contains and determined that nothing in it requires her to rush. The small pendant at her collarbone was a Kumps rose in white gold. Her mother's, worn every day since she was 19. She walked to the head table. She did not scan the room. She did not look for anyone. She arrived at her seat, set down her bag, and exchanged quiet words with the woman beside her, who was the chair of the foundation committee. Callum saw her from the back of the room. He had not seen her since the night on the sidewalk. He had left several messages with her legal team. He had not received responses. He looked at her. He looked at the head table. He looked at the program in his hand, which he had read 3 times earlier that day while reviewing the project documentation, and which said, clearly, in print, that the evening's presenting sponsor was the Fontaine Family Foundation, represented by its Director of Community Investment. He had not looked up who that was. He looked now. He felt the specific, concrete sensation of a man whose understanding of several years of his life is rearranging itself in real time. Not dramatically, but methodically, like a spreadsheet updating. The symposium director approached the microphone and introduced the foundation's representative. She read from a card. The Fontaine Family Foundation, established 1981, the holdings in health research funding, community medicine, and institutional philanthropy across 7 provinces. Tonight, represented by its Director of Community Investment, Petra Fontaine-Sorel. The room applauded. Callum's hands were on the table. He did not move them. Petra stood. She walked to the podium. She looked at the room. She spoke for 5 minutes. She spoke about women in healthcare, about the particular invisibility of nursing work, about the infrastructure of care that holds institutions upright and is rarely named and almost never thanked. She spoke about systems and who builds them and what happens when the builders are dismissed. She spoke with the calm of someone who has already made every important decision and is simply now doing the part that comes after. She did not mention Callum. She did not mention Elspeth. She did not need to. Every person in that room who knew the name Whitmore understood what they were witnessing. A woman who had been told she was embarrassing, on a sidewalk, in the snow, announcing with perfect composure that the sidewalk was hers. She returned to her seat. She poured herself a glass of water. Callum leaned across to the junior associate beside him and said something under his breath. The junior associate nodded and looked at the program again with an expression that suggested he was filing this information away very carefully. Callum excused himself from the table. He crossed the room. He stopped at the edge of the head table and waited until there was a pause in the conversation around Petra. She noticed him. She finished her sentence to the woman beside her. Then she turned. His voice, when he found it, was low. Petra, I didn't know. I need you to understand that I genuinely did not know. She looked at him. She had the expression she sometimes wore in the maternity ward when a patient's family member asked a question that had a complicated answer and she needed to deliver it clearly, and without softening it to the point of dishonesty. I know you didn't know, Callum. That's not a defense. That's the problem. He started to say something else. You were married to me for 3 years, she said. You knew what I did for a living, and you never asked a single question about my life before you. You knew my father existed, and you never asked about him. You knew I handled every financial aspect of our life, and you never asked how. You didn't know because you weren't curious. And you weren't curious because you weren't interested. And now you're standing at this table and the only thing you can think to say is that you didn't know. She picked up her water glass. I've already moved on, she said. You should start thinking about what that means for you. She turned back to the woman beside her. Callum stood at the edge of the table for another moment. Then he walked back across the room to his seat near the back, sat down, and did not speak for the remainder of the evening. Part 9. The final account. The weeks after the symposium concluded what Petra's departure had begun. Callum's firm lost the symposium fit-out contract, not through interference, through ordinary professional consequence. The project had been managed poorly in Petra's absence, the timeline had slipped, and the Shaw Center's facilities team had noted several administrative failures in the final reporting. The contract was not renewed. 2 of his firm's 3 partners had a conversation Callum was not invited to. The firm was restructuring. Callum's role was being reviewed. He called Maitre Tremblay's office to ask if there was any possibility of reconsidering the divorce terms. Maitre Tremblay's assistant told him, politely, that there was not, and that if he had questions about the settlement offer currently on the table, he should direct them to his own legal counsel, who had been waiting 3 weeks for a response. Elspeth left a voicemail. It was 12 minutes long, however. It used the word misunderstanding 9 times. It did not contain a single concrete acknowledgement of a single specific thing she had done. Petra listened to it once while doing dishes in the Elgin Street apartment on an ordinary Wednesday evening, with a mug of tea on the counter and her daughter asleep in the next room. The baby had arrived 6 weeks after the gala. A girl, healthy, with a particular expression of concentrated skepticism that the delivery nurse said she had never seen on a newborn before. Petra had laughed for the first time in what felt like months. She named her Margot. Fiona sent a text. It said, "Hey Petra, I hope things are okay. I know it's been complicated. I'm actually starting a wellness initiative for women in healthcare and was wondering if there might be any connection through your foundation." Petra read it. She did not respond. Fiona could contact the foundation through the public inquiry form on the website, same as everyone else. The woman who had told colleagues that Petra was a bit much could request funding like any other applicant. Callum called once more. Maitre Tremblay's team relayed the message. He was asking whether there was any possibility of reconciliation. Petra was in the Elgin Street apartment when she heard this. It was early evening. Margot was in her arms, looking out the window with that same concentrated expression at the city going dark. The Ottawa River was silver in the last light. "Tell him I don't have any anger left for him," Petra said. "And tell him that's not the same as forgiveness, and forgiveness isn't the same as coming back." She held Margot up slightly toward the window, and Margot looked at the river. Part 10. The Compass. Lean. On a Sunday in April, 8 months after the night on the sidewalk, Petra sat on the balcony of the Elgin Street apartment with a cup of coffee and her daughter in her lap and her father in the chair across from her. Edouard Fontaine had driven from Montreal that morning. He had brought a bag of groceries from the market on Saint Laurent, because he was a man who expressed care through specific practical acts. He had made coffee. He had sliced the bread. He had done these things without being asked and without remarking upon them, because to him they were simply what people did when they were sharing a kitchen with someone they loved. The morning was cool and bright. Ottawa in April is unconvincing. It promises spring and then pulls it back. But on that particular Sunday, the light was real, and the river below was running fast with the melt, and it smelled like something beginning. Margot was awake. She had been examining the compass rose pendant at Petra's collarbone with the focused gravity of infants encountering objects for the first time. Her small fingers closed around it and tugged. Petra let her hold it. The pendant had been her mother's. Edouard had given it to Petra on her 18th birthday, a week after her mother's diagnosis, a year before she died. He had said only, "Your mother wore this because it reminded her that she always knew where she was going, even when she was lost." Petra had worn it every day since. She looked at her daughter's hand, wrapped around the white gold disc. She thought about her mother. She thought about the decision she had made at 12 years old, watching the monitors in the hospital room, that she wanted to be the person who held the hand rather than the person who signed the checks. She thought about the years she had spent building a life inside a marriage that was really a supporting role in someone else's story, invisible in the ways that kept things running, and visible only when Callum needed an audience to confirm he wasn't the problem. She thought about the night in the snow, the torn invitation, the 6 faces watching. She did not feel angry about it anymore. Anger had been useful. It had carried her through the first weeks, had kept her precise when she needed to be precise, had made the binder and the documentation and the legal filing feel like something other than grief. But anger had a natural limit, and she had reached it and moved through it, and on the other side was something quieter. Something that felt less like a wound and more like a scar, permanent and real and completely hers. Edouard watched his daughter from across the table. He had spent the past 8 months being available without being intrusive, which was perhaps the hardest thing he had ever done in his life. He was a man accustomed to solving problems by applying resources. Watching Petra rebuild her life with her own competence, on her own terms, using his support only as infrastructure and never as rescue, had required a restraint he was not sure he had possessed before. He thought he was a better father for it. Margot released the pendant. Her hand opened, slowly, and reached instead for the light falling through the railing. Petra watched her daughter reach for the light, and felt the shape of the past 3 years settle into something she could carry. She had not been naive, exactly. She had been hopeful in a specific way that required her to trust what she had observed, and to believe that decency, when she found it, would hold. It had not held. She had lost 3 years to a marriage that consumed her labor and did not see her, and had dismissed her on a sidewalk in the snow in front of witnesses. She had also learned what she was made of, when the structure failed. She had learned that she could sit in a hospital waiting room at 3 in the morning and make a decision without panicking. She could document her own life with the same rigor she applied to patient charts. She could walk into a room where her name was on a program and speak for 5 minutes without her voice shaking once. She could rebuild from a foundation that was entirely her own, because the foundation had always been entirely her own. She could leave. And she had. Margot made a sound, soft, directed at the light or at the river, or at some private interior experience of being 8 months old on an April morning. Petra held her closer and felt the warmth of her daughter's weight against her ribs. The river ran below them. The city moved. Her father ate his toast and said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. The women who hold things together, she thought, do not always announce what they're holding, they simply hold it. And when they put it down, the people who never notice the weight discover very quickly what silence sounds like when there's nothing left underneath it. She sipped her coffee. She let the morning be what it was.